I thought I was having a nightmare when I woke up at 2 in the morning in my son's house and found my daughter-in-law Ashley sitting in the pitch-black living room, staring at the baby monitor with an expression of pure terror on her face. But when she whispered those bone-chilling words, "He's not supposed to be here," and I looked at the monitor screen to see what had frightened her so much, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The baby's crib was completely empty. 3-month-old Tommy was gone, and Ashley was talking to someone who apparently wasn't supposed to exist. What I discovered over the next 48 hours would shatter everything I thought I knew about my son's perfect marriage, expose a web of lies that went back years, and reveal that the woman I'd welcomed into our family was living under a completely false identity for reasons that could get us all killed. My name is Margaret Collins, I'm 61 years old, and I live in a small town outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, where I've been a retired elementary school teacher for the past 3 years. I raised my son Mark as a single mother after his father died in a car accident when Mark was only 8, and I've always been protective of him, maybe too protective according to some people. But when your child is all you have left in the world, you tend to watch out for signs of trouble, even when they're grown adults with families of their own. Mark is 32 now, a successful software engineer who works remotely for a tech company in Silicon Valley, while living in North Carolina, because he loves the mountains and the slower pace of life. He's always been a quiet, thoughtful person, the kind of son who calls his mother every Sunday and never forgets a birthday or holiday. When he told me he was getting married 4 years ago, I was thrilled that he'd found someone to share his life with, but I have to admit, I had my reservations about Ashley from the very beginning. Ashley claimed to be 28 years old when they met, with long auburn hair, green eyes, and the kind of natural beauty that didn't require much makeup to be striking. She was working as a freelance graphic designer when Mark met her at a coffee shop in downtown Charlotte, and their romance moved quickly, maybe too quickly for my liking. Within 6 months they were living together. Within a year they were engaged. Within 18 months, they were married in a small ceremony that felt rushed and impersonal. What bothered me most about Ashley wasn't anything specific I could put my finger on, but rather a collection of small inconsistencies that added up to a feeling that something wasn't quite right. She was charming and polite, always saying the right things and behaving appropriately, but there was something almost rehearsed about her interactions, as if she was playing a role rather than just being herself. Ashley never talked about her childhood or her family, changing the subject whenever I asked about her parents or siblings. She claimed her parents had died in a house fire when she was in college, and that she was an only child with no extended family, which explained why none of her relatives attended the wedding. But when I tried to offer condolences or ask about her memories of them, she would get uncomfortable and find reasons to leave the room. She had no college friends that Mark had ever met, no childhood photos, no mementos from her past. When I mentioned that it was unusual for someone to have so few connections to their history, Mark defended her by saying that some people just preferred to focus on the future rather than dwelling on the past. He was so in love with her that he didn't see what I saw, or maybe he saw it and chose to ignore it because he was happier than he'd ever been. Ashley's work as a graphic designer was supposedly done entirely online for clients she'd never met in person, which meant she could work from anywhere and had no local business connections. She paid for everything in cash, claimed she didn't trust credit cards, and seemed to have an unusual amount of money for someone whose income should have been relatively modest and unpredictable. But the thing that bothered me most was the way Ashley sometimes seemed to forget details about things she'd told us before. She'd mention growing up in Florida one day, then refer to childhood memories from Georgia the next week. She'd say she was allergic to shellfish, then order shrimp at dinner the following month. When Mark or I would point out these inconsistencies, she'd laugh them off as being scatterbrained or blame them on stress from work. Despite my concerns, I tried to give Ashley the benefit of the doubt because Mark was clearly happy, and ultimately, his happiness was more important to me than my vague suspicions about his wife's past. When Ashley announced she was pregnant 2 years after their wedding, I was genuinely excited about becoming a grandmother, and hoped that having a baby would help me bond with her in a way we hadn't been able to before. But Ashley's behavior during pregnancy was even more concerning than her usual secretiveness. She refused to let me accompany her to doctor's appointments, claiming that she wanted to keep the experience private between her and Mark. She wouldn't tell me which hospital she was planning to deliver at or which obstetrician she was seeing. When I offered to help plan a baby shower, She said she didn't want one because she preferred to keep things low-key. Mark seemed to think Ashley's desire for privacy was just her personality, but to me it felt like she was deliberately keeping me at arm's length during what should have been one of the most exciting times in our family's life. I began to wonder if Ashley had some kind of medical issue she was hiding, or if there was something about the pregnancy that wasn't what it seemed. When Tommy was born in March, he was a beautiful, healthy baby with Mark's dark hair and what appeared to be Ashley's green eyes. I was allowed to visit at the hospital, but only for brief periods, and Ashley seemed anxious and uncomfortable whenever I held the baby or asked questions about his birth weight, length, or other normal grandparent inquiries. Once they brought Tommy home, Ashley became even more protective and secretive. She insisted on handling all the nighttime feedings herself, even though Mark offered to help and I offered to stay overnight to give her breaks. She seemed to have an unusual amount of knowledge about baby care for a first-time mother, almost as if she'd done this before, but when I complimented her on how naturally motherhood seemed to come to her, she got flustered and said she just read a lot of books. The strangest thing was the way Ashley sometimes looked at Tommy, particularly when she didn't think anyone else was watching. Instead of the adoring gaze most new mothers have when looking at their babies, Ashley would sometimes stare at Tommy with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. It wasn't love or joy or even exhaustion. It was almost like confusion, as if she was trying to figure out who he was or where he'd come from. 3 months after Tommy was born, Ashley called to invite me for a week-long visit to help with the baby and spend some quality time as a family. I was thrilled because it was the first time she'd initiated contact with me rather than just politely going along with visits that Mark had arranged. I packed my bags immediately and drove the 2 hours from my house to theirs, looking forward to bonding with my grandson, and maybe finally breaking through whatever wall existed between Ashley and me. Mark and Ashley lived in a beautiful 2-story house on 5 acres outside of Asheville, surrounded by woods and mountains, with the kind of privacy and tranquility that most people only dream about. The house itself was modern but cozy, with an open floor plan, lots of natural light, and a nursery that Ashley had decorated in soft greens and yellows with woodland animal themes. I arrived on a Sunday afternoon, and everything seemed normal at first. Ashley appeared genuinely happy to see me. Mark was his usual warm and welcoming self, and Tommy was an absolute angel, sleeping peacefully in my arms and making the kinds of adorable baby noises that melt grandmothers' hearts. We had a nice dinner together, spent the evening catching up and playing with the baby, and I went to bed in their guest room feeling optimistic about the week ahead. But at exactly 2:17 a.m. according to the digital clock on the nightstand, I woke up with a dry mouth and decided to go downstairs to get a glass of water. The house was completely quiet and dark, with only the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of crickets outside. I was trying to be quiet so I wouldn't wake anyone, making my way carefully down the stairs and toward the kitchen. That's when I noticed a faint glow coming from the living room, like the light from a television or computer screen. I assumed Mark or Ashley had fallen asleep watching something and left it on, so I decided to turn it off before getting my water. But as I got closer to the living room, I realized the light was coming from the baby monitor on the coffee table, and someone was sitting on the couch staring at it. Ashley was sitting in the dark wearing nothing but a thin white nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders, completely motionless except for the slight rise and fall of her breathing. The light from the baby monitor screen was casting an eerie glow on her face, and her expression was one of absolute terror. Her eyes were wide and unblinking, her mouth slightly open, and her hands were gripping the edge of the couch cushion so tightly that her knuckles were white. I stood there for a moment, unsure whether to announce my presence or quietly retreat back upstairs. Ashley seemed to be in some kind of trance, completely absorbed in whatever she was seeing on the monitor screen. I couldn't see the screen from where I was standing, but I could hear the faint sound of static and the occasional crackle that baby monitors sometimes make. Then Ashley spoke in a whisper so soft I almost didn't hear her. "He's not supposed to be here." I felt a chill run down my spine. Who was she talking about? Was there someone in Tommy's room? I took a step closer, trying to see the monitor screen, and Ashley continued whispering, "This isn't right. They said he wouldn't come. They promised me we'd have more time." Now I was genuinely frightened. I cleared my throat softly and said, "Ashley, are you okay?" She jumped like she'd been electrocuted, spinning around to face me with wild eyes and a gasp that seemed to echo through the quiet house. For a moment, she looked at me like she didn't recognize me, like I was a stranger who had broken into her home. "Margaret," she said, her voice shaking. I didn't hear you come downstairs. I was just getting some water," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Are you all right? You seemed upset about something." Ashley looked back at the baby monitor, then at me, then back at the monitor again. "I was just checking on Tommy. Sometimes I have trouble sleeping and I like to make sure he's okay." I moved closer so I could see the monitor screen, expecting to see Tommy sleeping peacefully in his crib. Instead, the screen showed an empty crib with rumpled blankets but no baby. "Ashley," I said, trying not to panic. "Where is Tommy?" The color drained from Ashley's face completely. She looked at the monitor screen, then jumped up from the couch and ran toward the stairs, with me following close behind. We rushed into Tommy's nursery, and there he was, sleeping soundly in his crib exactly as he should be. But Ashley didn't seem relieved to find him safe. Instead, she stood over the crib with a look of confusion and fear, as if she couldn't understand how he had gotten there. "Ashley," I said firmly. "What's going on? You said someone wasn't supposed to be here. Who were you talking about?" Ashley started crying then, not the gentle tears of a tired mother, but the kind of desperate sobbing that comes from deep fear or guilt. "I don't know," she said between sobs. "I've been having these dreams, these nightmares where people come to take Tommy away from me. And sometimes when I look at the monitor, I see things that aren't really there." I put my arm around her shoulders, trying to comfort her while also trying to understand what was happening. "Honey, this sounds like it might be postpartum anxiety or depression. Have you talked to your doctor about this?" "I can't talk to anyone about this," Ashley said, pulling away from me. "You don't understand. There are things about my past, things I haven't told Mark, things that could put all of us in danger if the wrong people found out about Tommy." Now I was even more confused and concerned. "What kind of things?" "Ashley, if you're in some kind of trouble, we need to help you. We need to protect Tommy." Ashley looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of desperation and calculation, like she was trying to decide whether she could trust me with whatever secret she was carrying. "I can't tell you," she said finally. "It's better if you don't know. But I need you to promise me something. If anything ever happens to me, if I ever disappear or if something bad happens, you have to make sure Tommy is safe. Promise me you'll protect him." The way she said it sent chills through my entire body. This wasn't the ramblings of a woman with postpartum depression. This was someone who was genuinely afraid for her life and her child's safety. "Ashley, you're scaring me. What are you involved in? What kind of danger are we talking about?" But Ashley just shook her head and walked back to Tommy's crib, adjusting his blankets and kissing his forehead with the kind of tenderness that made it clear she loved him deeply, whatever else might be going on. "Go back to bed, Margaret. I'm sorry I scared you. I'm just not sleeping well lately." But I didn't go back to bed. I went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea, then sat at the kitchen table thinking about everything I'd witnessed and everything Ashley had said. Her words kept echoing in my head. They said he wouldn't come. They promised me we'd have more time. Who were they? Who had promised her something? And what did Tommy have to do with any of it? I decided that in the morning, I was going to have a serious conversation with Mark about his wife's behavior and see if he'd noticed anything unusual. I was also going to do some investigating on my own because something was very wrong with this situation, and I couldn't just pretend everything was normal when my grandson's safety might be at risk. Drop the word secrets in the comments if you think Ashley is hiding something dangerous. And make sure you subscribe because what I discovered about my daughter-in-law's true identity will shock you to your core. The next morning, Ashley acted as if nothing unusual had happened. She made breakfast, played with Tommy, chatted about normal things like the weather and what we might do during my visit. But I could see the exhaustion in her eyes and the way she kept glancing toward the windows as if she was watching for something or someone. Mark left for work around 8:30, and I waited until Ashley was upstairs giving Tommy his morning bath before I started my investigation. I began by looking through the papers and documents they kept in a desk drawer in the living room, hoping to find something that might give me a clue about Ashley's background, or what she might be afraid of. What I found instead was a collection of inconsistencies that made my earlier suspicions look minor by comparison. Ashley's driver's license listed her birthplace as Tampa, Florida, but her voter registration card said she was born in Savannah, Georgia. Her social security card looked newer than it should have for someone who was 28 years old. And most troubling of all, I found a medical record from Tommy's birth that listed Ashley's maiden name as something completely different from what she'd told us when she married Mark. I also noticed that all of Ashley's official documents seemed to be dated from the same time period about 5 years ago, as if her entire documented identity had been created at once rather than accumulated over a lifetime the way most people's paperwork develops. When Ashley came downstairs with Tommy, I decided to test her by asking casual questions about her past and see how she responded. I started with simple things like what her favorite restaurant had been in her hometown, what high school she'd attended, what her parents had done for work. Each question made Ashley visibly uncomfortable, and her answers were vague and inconsistent. When I asked about her mother's job, she said her mother had been a nurse, but later in the same conversation she referred to her mother's work as a teacher. When I asked about her childhood home, she described a house near the beach, then seemed to catch herself and said she'd meant a lake, not the ocean. By afternoon, I was convinced that Ashley was living under a false identity, but I still didn't know why or what kind of danger she might be running from. I waited until she put Tommy down for his nap, then confronted her directly. Ashley, I need you to tell me the truth about who you really are and what's going on. I've found inconsistencies in your documents. Your stories about your past don't add up. And last night you were clearly terrified about something involving Tommy. I can't help protect my grandson if I don't know what the threat is. Ashley's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, fear, calculation, and finally resignation. She sat down at the kitchen table and put her head in her hands. I never wanted it to be like this, she said quietly. I never wanted to lie to Mark or to you. But I didn't have a choice. What do you mean you didn't have a choice? Ashley looked up at me with tears in her eyes. My name isn't Ashley Collins. It's Sarah Mitchell. And I've been in the Federal Witness Protection Program for the past 6 years. The words hit me like a physical blow. Witness protection. That explained everything: the false documents, the lack of family connections, the cash payments, the secrecy about her past. But it also raised terrifying questions about what kind of crime she'd witnessed and what kind of people might be looking for her. What did you witness? I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. I used to work as a bookkeeper for what I thought was a legitimate shipping company in Miami. It turned out they were moving drugs and money for a major organized crime family, and when I discovered what was really going on, I tried to quit. But I'd seen too much, learned too much about their operations. They decided I was a liability. Ashley's voice was steady now, as if telling the truth was a relief after years of maintaining a false identity. One night, I witnessed my boss murder a federal agent who had been investigating the organization. They saw me in the parking lot, and I knew they'd kill me to keep me quiet. I went straight to the FBI and agreed to testify in exchange for protection. And they gave you a new identity. New name, new background, new social security number, new everything. I was supposed to stay away from my old life completely, never contact anyone from my past, never do anything that might reveal my location. The organization I testified against was convicted and their leadership went to prison, but they have associates on the outside who would love to get revenge against the person who destroyed their operation. I was beginning to understand the scope of the danger Ashley had been living with, but I still didn't understand what had changed recently to make her so frightened. If you've been safe for 6 years, why are you suddenly worried now? What's different? Ashley got up and walked to the window, looking out at the woods surrounding their house as if she expected to see someone watching from behind the trees. When I fell in love with Mark, I knew I was breaking the rules by getting married without telling my handlers. When I got pregnant, I knew I was making things even more complicated. But I thought maybe enough time had passed, maybe I could have a normal life. But something happened to make you think otherwise. 3 weeks ago, I got a call from my FBI contact. They'd received intelligence that someone had been asking questions about me, using my real name, Sarah Mitchell. Someone was looking for me, and they were getting close. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but I still didn't understand what Ashley had been seeing on the baby monitor that had terrified her so much. Last night when you said, "He's not supposed to be here," who were you talking about? Ashley turned away from the window and looked at me with embarrassment and exhaustion. I've been having hallucinations from stress and lack of sleep. Sometimes when I look at the baby monitor, I see people in Tommy's room who aren't really there. Last night I thought I saw a man standing over his crib, and I was convinced someone had found us and come to take Tommy as revenge against me. But Tommy was fine. Tommy was fine, but the fear is real. These people, Margaret, they don't just kill the person who wronged them. They destroy entire families. If they find me, they'll kill Mark and Tommy just to make sure I suffer as much as possible before they kill me too. I felt sick to my stomach thinking about the danger my son and grandson were in, but I also felt a surge of protective anger. So what do? Do we call the FBI? Do we run? How do we keep Tommy safe? Ashley looked surprised that I'd said we instead of you. And I realized that despite all her lies and secrets, I'd already decided that whatever happened next, we were going to face it as a family. I don't know, Ashley admitted. I've been trying to decide whether to contact my handlers and ask to be relocated again, or to run on my own and hope we can disappear before they find us. What about Mark? Does he know any of this? Ashley shook her head. He thinks my name is Ashley Collins, that I'm an orphan with no family, that I'm just a regular person with a boring past. If I tell him the truth, I'm asking him to give up his entire life, to go into hiding with someone whose real name he doesn't even know. I sat back in my chair, trying to process the magnitude of the situation. My son had unknowingly married a woman in witness protection, had a child with her, and was now potentially in mortal danger because of crimes he knew nothing about. Ashley or Sarah, whatever your name is, Mark loves you. He'll do whatever it takes to protect you and Tommy, but he can't make informed decisions about his family's safety if he doesn't know what the threat is. Ashley nodded slowly. I know. I've known I'd have to tell him eventually. I just kept hoping we'd have more time, that maybe the danger would pass and we could keep living this normal life we'd built together. When is Mark coming home from work? Around 6. Then we have 4 hours to figure out how to explain this to him and decide what our next steps are going to be. For the rest of the afternoon, Ashley told me the complete truth about her past, her real name, where she'd grown up, what she'd witnessed, who she was hiding from. She showed me the emergency contact information for her FBI handler and the protocols she was supposed to follow if she ever felt her location had been compromised. The woman I'd known as Ashley Collins had essentially never existed. Sarah Mitchell was intelligent, brave, and deeply traumatized by years of living in fear and isolation. She'd built a false identity so convincing that even I, with all my suspicions, hadn't guessed the real scope of her deception. When Mark came home from work, we sat him down in the living room and Sarah told him everything. I watched my son's face go through shock, confusion, hurt, anger, and finally determination as he processed the fact that his entire marriage had been built on a lie, but that the woman he loved and their child were in genuine danger. So what you're telling me, Mark said slowly, is that your name isn't Ashley, you're not an orphan, and there are people who want to kill our entire family because of something you witnessed 6 years ago. Yes, Sarah said simply. Mark was quiet for a long time, looking at Sarah, then at me, then at Tommy sleeping peacefully in his bouncer, oblivious to the adult conversation happening around him. Okay, he said finally. What do we need to do to keep our family safe? It wasn't the reaction I'd expected. I thought Mark would be angry about the lies, or hurt that Sarah hadn't trusted him with the truth, or overwhelmed by the danger they were all in. Instead, he seemed to immediately shift into problem-solving mode, focused entirely on protecting the people he loved regardless of what they'd done in the past. We need to call my FBI handler, Sarah said. If someone is really looking for me, we need to be relocated immediately. New identities, new location, new everything. All of us. Mark asked. All of us. Margaret too, if she wants to stay with her grandson. Once they know I have a family, everyone connected to me becomes a target. I felt my heart skip a beat. Sarah was asking me to give up my entire life, my house, my friends, my community, my identity, to go into hiding with a daughter-in-law whose real name I'd learned just hours ago. But when I looked at Tommy, sleeping so peacefully and trusting that the adults around him would keep him safe, the decision was easy. I'm in, I said. Whatever we need to do. Sarah called her FBI handler from our kitchen while Mark and I packed emergency bags and tried to figure out what we could take with us if we had to leave immediately. The conversation was brief and tense, and when Sarah hung up, her face was grim. Agent Rodriguez is driving up from Charlotte tonight. She says the intelligence about someone looking for me is credible and recent. We need to be ready to leave within 24 hours. That evening was surreal. We had dinner together like a normal family, gave Tommy his bath and put him to bed like it was any other night, but all of us knew it might be the last time we'd ever be in that house or live under those names. Agent Rodriguez arrived at 10 p.m. A serious woman in her 40s who treated the situation with the gravity it deserved but also with the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. Sarah's cover has been compromised, she confirmed. We have reliable intelligence that associates of the Morales organization have identified her current location and are planning to move against her and her family within the next few days. What are our options? Mark asked. Relocation with new identities for all of you. We'll move you somewhere across the country, set you up with new documentation, new jobs, new histories. You'll essentially become different people. What about our house? Our jobs? Our lives here? Agent Rodriguez's expression was sympathetic but firm. Those lives are over. I'm sorry, but there's no going back once your safety has been compromised to this degree. Mark and Sarah spent the night discussing their options and making the hardest decision of their lives. I spent the night holding Tommy and trying to memorize his face, knowing that even if we all stayed together, he would grow up as a different person with a different name, never knowing the identity he was born with. By morning, we'd all agreed. We would accept relocation and start over together as a family, whatever that meant and wherever it took us. Over the next week, Agent Rodriguez and her team orchestrated our disappearance with remarkable efficiency. Our house was sold quickly to a cash buyer the FBI had arranged. Mark's employer was told he'd had a family emergency and would not be returning. I called my few close friends to say I was moving closer to my son and wouldn't be able to keep in touch. Most heartbreaking of all, we had to leave Tommy's nursery behind, along with all the photos and mementos of his first 3 months of life. Sarah cried as she packed his clothes and toys, knowing that the little boy who had been Tommy Collins would cease to exist, and someone new would take his place. 2 weeks later, we were living in a small town in Oregon under completely new identities. Sarah became Jennifer, Mark became David, Tommy became Lucas, and I became Helen. We were given a modest house, jobs that matched our skills but were different enough from our previous work to avoid recognition, and detailed backstories about our family history that we had to memorize and maintain consistently. The transition was difficult for all of us. Mark struggled with adjusting to his new job and missing his old colleagues. Sarah battled with guilt over the upheaval she'd caused and fear that we might be found again. I mourned the loss of my home, my community, and my identity as Margaret Collins. But we were together, we were safe, and Tommy, now Lucas, was thriving, oblivious to the dramatic changes in his circumstances. 3 months after our relocation, Agent Rodriguez called with news that felt like a miracle. The remaining members of the Morales organization had been arrested in a coordinated raid across 3 states. The people who had been hunting for Sarah were now in federal custody and would likely spend the rest of their lives in prison. Does this mean we can go back to being ourselves? Mark asked during the phone call. I'm afraid not, Agent Rodriguez replied. Your old identities are still compromised, and there's always the possibility that other associates could surface in the future. But you can stop looking over your shoulders. The immediate threat is over. Today, 5 years after that terrifying night when I found Sarah staring at the baby monitor, we're still living in Oregon under our assumed names. Lucas is now 8 years old and has 2 little sisters, Emma and Lily, who were born after we relocated. He has no memory of his early months as Tommy Collins and no knowledge of the danger he was in as a baby. Mark and Sarah, David and Jennifer, have built a strong marriage based on complete honesty after that initial foundation of necessary lies. They run a small graphic design business together and are active in their community, finally able to live a normal life without fear. I've adapted to being Helen instead of Margaret, and while I still miss my old life sometimes, I've found new purpose in helping to raise my grandchildren and being part of a family that chose each other over and over again through the most difficult circumstances imaginable. Sarah still has nightmares sometimes, and she still checks on the children obsessively some nights, but the terror that used to consume her has faded into manageable caution. She's learned to trust that we're safe, that the people who wanted to hurt us can't find us anymore. and that the family she was so afraid of losing is stronger than ever. Looking back, I realized that my initial suspicions about Ashley were both completely wrong and completely right. I was wrong to think she was a gold digger or a manipulator or someone who didn't love my son, but I was right to sense that she was hiding something significant, and I was right to trust my instincts when something felt dangerous. The most important thing I learned from this experience is that sometimes the people we love are carrying burdens we can't imagine, and our job isn't to judge their past decisions, but to support them in creating a safe future. Sarah made choices as a young woman that put her in an impossible situation, but she also made choices as a wife and mother that protected her family, even when it meant sacrificing everything she'd worked to build. Sometimes love means giving up everything you thought you wanted in order to keep the people who matter most safe from harm. And sometimes the scariest moments of our lives, like finding your daughter-in-law whispering to an empty baby monitor at 2 in the morning, turn out to be the beginning of the strongest bonds your family will ever have. What do you think about the choices Sarah made to protect her family? Would you have been willing to give up your entire identity to keep your loved ones safe? Have you ever had to trust someone whose past you didn't fully understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about families who discovered that love is stronger than fear, and that sometimes starting over is the only way to truly be free. Because sometimes the people who seem the most mysterious are actually the most brave, and sometimes the families that seem the most broken are actually the most unbreakable.